Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Melissa. I'm the Client Experience Coordinator for the Scale Up program here at Invest Ottawa, where we're proud to support about 600 startups and scale-ups across the venture development team, including some clean tech companies who are supporting the global energy transition. So we'd like to welcome you on behalf of Invest Ottawa, and in our classic way, we'd like to start with a land acknowledgement, so I'll start by reading that out here. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. We're grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory and to come together as a national community. Further, I want to respect and affirm the inherent treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples across this land. We recognize the contributions of the Métis, Inuit, and all Indigenous peoples have and continue to make, both in shaping and strengthening this community and on our country as a whole. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Devashish Paul, CEO of BluWave and the facilitator of our panel today.
I think I got this. We're on? Okay. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for another edition of our Global Energy Transition Summit. In this case, it's an all-Canadian panel and a set of Canadian contributors. But I think the topic is timely. We've had leaders provincially and federally talk about how important energy resiliency is to Canada's economy and basically strengthening our own domestic ecosystems to take care of ourselves, but also win in global markets. So what we'll do today is start with an introduction of some background of the energy industry, which I will provide. I'll give my lens on how we got from there to here. And then we will have an address from Stephen Leche. Stephen Leche is the Ontario Minister of Energy. He regrets he can't join us today in person, so he's recorded a video for our consumption and to tee things off. Following that, our panelists will be engaging, answering a number of questions related to the energy transition and Canada's electricity industry. That will take us roughly to 2 p.m. For those of you who are on the live stream will end at that point. From 2 p.m. and beyond, those of you who are here live, we will entertain questions from the audience about any topic pertaining to the theme of this panel. So with that, I'll get things going, and I have some notes, so I'm not fumbling with my phone this time. We have our leaders talking about Canada as an energy superpower, and they're truly correct about this. We have all kinds of energy, but if I want to take a step back, I was just at our BluWave-ai Smart Grid AI Center of Excellence, which is in Summerside, PEI. And the mayor of Summerside said, we don't have any hydro in Summerside. We don't have any natural gas. We don't have any nuclear. So we kind of have nothing. We don't have any natural energy wealth in Summerside. And many years ago, almost 20 years ago, the Canadian Armed Forces ran a base in Summerside, and it was the biggest employer. And when the base shut down, they were in a, oh my God, what do we do moment? And they had to look at how to diversify their economy. And one of the first things they thought about is, well, we can make energy out of the sky with solar and wind. So let's take care of our energy resiliency. And from there, they've built all kinds of things for their economy. So in the context of all the tariffs and everything going on, I remember when I was a fourth-year cadet at Royal Military College, and they take electrical engineering students from every university to go see the real world. So they took us to the Adam Beck generating station at Niagara Falls. And so we all know where that is. You can see the United States across the river. And all the water southeast of the Hudson Bay is coming and flowing through the Great Lakes through that spot and generating, like, in quotes, infinite renewable energy. And I thought that was kind of cool, right? Like, you're just harnessing the energy and away we go. So Canada, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we did substantial investments in hydroelectric power, establishing ourselves as a world leader in that particular market. And last week, we announced at BluWave-ai that we were selected by the city of Tokyo. Out of 59 companies globally, 7 were selected to win a $1.2 million award to expand the company in Japan. So I started thinking about Japan. Thank you. Interestingly enough, last year in the country of Pakistan, they onboarded 22 gigawatts of solar, surpassing their 3 gigawatts of nuclear generation capacity. In 1 year, Pakistan was able to do that. And this happened organically with random people putting it on their roofs, as well as government investment. I'm giving that as an example because the world is onboarding 1 gigawatt of solar daily. And China has got to 1,000 gigawatts of solar plus wind energy combined in their grid. So that's, roughly speaking, 50 Ontario's worth. Adding to that, 2/3 of the world's deployment of energy storage, so like batteries in your cell phone, kind of like that same thing, but gigantic grid scale, is actually going on in China. But meanwhile, here in Ontario, we have also decided to make the same investments. There's 4 gigawatts of storage coming on board in Ontario. What this will allow us to do in Ontario is basically deal with fluctuations in the electricity grid, move a combination of nuclear, natural gas, hydro, fluctuating solar, fluctuating wind into batteries to match it perfectly with our consumption needs. And that consumption is turning on the hot water heater, turning on the lights, charging an EV, powering an AI data center, and so on and so forth. So electricity usage is projected to grow dramatically, and Team Canada has, from the 50s to today, put together substantial building blocks for the grids of the future. It's technology built by Canadians, for Canadians in our domestic economy, but also for us to be able to export it globally. And so today we have a really distinguished panel who's going to talk about various topics related to this. I'm going to first start off with having the minister's address, everyone on deck over there. And then after that, the panelists will introduce themselves and their companies, and then we'll go into the questions and answers. So with that, I guess we will play the video from Stephen Leche, the Minister of Energy in Doug Ford's Ontario Cabinet. And I believe we have a new federal cabinet with a new Minister of Energy also at NR Canada, Tim Hodgson, I think you mentioned. It was just announced earlier today. So over to you at the AV desk.
It is an honor to be joining you as we really recognize the leadership taking hold in our national capital and across our country as we lean in to more Canadian technology and made in Ontario solutions to the energy challenges we face on the horizon. We're going to need to produce and generate 75% more power by 2050. It's the equivalent of 4.5 cities of Toronto to the grid. But we have a plan, and we're harnessing the ingenuity, the talent, and the leadership, and the technological prowess of Canada in the world. From nuclear to hydro and everything in between, the world is turning to us. Just days ago, I was proud to announce that Ontario is moving forward, green-lighting the first small modular reactor being built in the G7 here in Ontario. We're talking about 18,000 Canadian jobs in construction and over 3,000 that will be permanently created for the next 65 years of that asset. an incredible success. Just weeks prior, we announced the first net new large-scale hydroelectric projects of Northern Ontario with Indigenous communities. We are on a roll, building for the future, and we're leveling up with a belief that Canada, Canadian ingenuity and technology and research should lead the way. So thank you for bringing forth your ideas and for your leadership and entrepreneurship and your risk-taking. Because for our government, we want to make it easier to invest, build the confidence, build the path to prosperity in our country and energy security around the world. So I wish you all the best, and thank you again for your partnership.
So I'd like to thank Minister Leche for taking a bit of time to acknowledge the technology and innovation coming out from different corners of our industry. Before I get the panelists to introduce their companies and their interest in the electricity market, so we have Guillaume Hervé, he's the CEO of Zetan AI, a Montreal-based company. Pierre Rivard, he's the chairman of Tuglich Energy Corporation and the founding CEO of Hydrogenics. Jeff Wright, who is a senior VP at Brookfield Renewables. And Erin O'Toole, who doesn't require much of an introduction if you've been around Canadian politics. He is now with Addit North America. And some of the background that he has actually surprised our team because we just thought he was a politician. But then we found out that he was a lawyer in the energy domain. So Guillaume, tell us a bit about your interest in the electricity market and Zetan and the role of AI and so forth.
Sure. So, well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me on the panel with my colleagues. Really an honor to be invited. At Zetan, so I'm CEO, co-founder of Zetan. We've been around since about 2018, and we've been in AI the whole time. And it's incredible the changes that we've seen in the last 6-7 years just in AI. And I'll talk about that today as well. What we do is we provide end-to-end solutions and tools to companies who want to introduce AI, either in the front end of their business and operations or in the back office functions, which is increasingly becoming actually the area of focus for a lot of companies. So these are all AI-powered productivity tools, as we like to call them. And electricity is very, very, very dear to my heart because AI today is large language models, massive models, often working orchestrated, as we call it, together, consuming massive amounts of data, requiring what we call a lot of compute power. And if there's one takeaway from my presence today is I think the industry needs to stop talking about data centers because you're kind of belittling almost the enormity of the task at hand. These are compute power centers is what we're trying to build, where you're computing massive amounts of information using large models to give somebody a result, sometimes in real time, which is increasingly complicated and difficult to do. So the link to AI for me is directly linked to the discussions on data centers. Just to give some numbers, whether it's McKinsey or PwC or Deloitte and all the big firms that do this for a living, if you look at the averages, they're projecting about a 14% compounded annual growth rate, CAGR, of the need of power, computing power to feed AI in the next 6 years, just between now and 2030. Just imagine that kind of capacity that needs to be built across Canada. And this is uninterrupted service because, if you're driving your car on automatic mode, you can't have that computer not working. And the other thing that people have to realize from a green energy perspective, 40% of the energy required in data centers pertaining to AI goes to cooling because that's what you're actually doing. You're computing so quickly and so fast that you're burning up the chips. And so whether it's air or water, for the most part, those are the two. That's the second part of the challenge with the discussion today. If you think of the provincial opportunity that I like to put on the table as well, is that Quebec, as an example, is looking to the challenge of AI and data, what I call compute power centers, as an opportunity to sell to the US. So not only do you have people talking about how do I sustain what the minister just talked about in terms of your own sovereign capability, but when you're Quebec, when you're Ontario, when you're not far from what is considered to be the biggest hog of energy, which is the eastern US, and you're able to deliver them compute power solutions within milliseconds, it offers up a huge market for reselling as well. So I'll put that on the table.
Over to Pierre.
Real pleasure to be here today. At Tug Lake Energy, we are an independent power producer, so we develop, own, and operate renewable energy assets in support of mining sites and populations that are not connected to the grid. What excites us is essentially doing a template for moving for the communities that do not have access to adequate electricity. And when you look at the planet, 2 billion people out of the 8 billion do not have access to electricity in the way we understand it here. So what we can learn here in Canada in managing remote mining sites and communities, or even subgrids within the grids, is probably the way the grid will be developed in the next century, as opposed to the centralized paradigm, which is now being changed. So this pixelization of the grid is very important to procurement programs we have, and we'll hear from Brookfield about storage and so on, but these are creating pockets or pixelizing the grid, which is very important. In terms of the mining site that we operate in the Arctic, the flagship is owned by Glencore. It's a Raglan mine, for those of you who may know it. It's in a community of 800 people right in the middle of the Arctic, and essentially having all of their services provided by diesel gensets. And we set out about 14 years ago to diversify the mix. So we added in, maybe I'll talk more in detail of what we have on the next question, but I'll just pass on to Jeff.
Yeah, over to you, Jeff.
Yep, thanks, Pierre, and thanks for inviting us out here, Dev and everyone. So Jeff Wright, I've been with Brookfield for about 13 years. Brookfield Renewable it trades on the Toronto Stock Exchange. We've got about 500 people here in the National Capital Region, but it's truly a global business. And so we've got 45,000 megawatts of primarily clean energy technology around the world. A lot of hydropower, wind, solar, batteries, and even some investments in nuclear. So by way of kind of my interest in electricity markets, I'm an economist by training, and I love the idea of supply and demand in real time. And the thing that's interesting about electricity markets, as Dev kind of alluded to in his opening comments there, is that supply and demand have to match at every instant of the day. And so energy storage is a really exciting technology for Brookfield. We see that as the bridge between some of the, the baseload nuclear and hydros, as Deb mentioned, and the intermittent renewables. It's really that bridge between that and demand that isn't as flexible, perhaps. And so Brookfield, kind of globally, we've got about 850 megawatts of battery energy storage systems operating currently around the world. Australia, Europe, United States. Proud to talk about the two projects here in Ontario, just outside of, in the west part of Ottawa here. So very exciting for us. And we've got about 2,200 megawatts of batteries under construction. So very topical discussion for us.
Jeff, you brought up a good point. We'll touch on it a bit more later. Managing supply and demand. So anyone in the audience or online, if you want to just Google what happened in Spain like 10 days ago, and the related failures in the grid, when you don't balance supply and demand well, problems happen. So over to Erin.
Thank you very much, Dev, and thanks, Melissa and Invest Ottawa. It's great to be with you today. I love coming to events like this for two reasons. First, proves Erin O'Toole, yes, is still alive. Politics I got out of 18 months ago, but still very proud of those 10 years. But second, and more important, the energy transition is something that we've talked about, but not executed properly. And I think we have a great opportunity to do so. And as Dev said, he was surprised when, I was a politician that had a brain, I think is what you were implying by that. But
I never said that.
But I did work in energy for a large law firm, and I was on the board of a local distribution company in the GTA, kind of like the Ottawa Hydro of Durham region. And so I saw the challenge of an energy transition while your economy is growing, while you have trade uncertainty, while you have climate ambitions, but the need for people to commute to work. The challenge is building public transit. So the energy transition is sometimes talked about well, but not executed. And the final thing I'll say, where I think my perspective in both the private and public sectors from a political standpoint is helpful, is how many people have been to University Avenue in Toronto? The big grand avenue down the middle from Alan, you remember it. The only statue to a Canadian politician on that entire route, and I see it every day because my office is right beside it, is Adam Beck. And around the plinth of his statue is all the hydro dams, including the Adam Beck generating station in his name in Niagara, but all the rivers in the north. And the early Ontario government said, public power is the key to our economic success. Now, today, we don't think it has to all be done by crowns, but there is a role for the province in terms of battery storage, in terms of optimizing our grid, as private sector players like Brookfield and others step up and bring worldwide expertise. The final thing I'll say, talking about government, in the early days of Canada, we were much more risk-taking. We were much more ingenuitive. It was in the 60s and 70s we slowed that down. Brookfield itself had success in Canada and used to be called Brascan because of Brazil Light and Power by Canada. We were taking our hydropower expertise around the world really early as a country. We were the third country to have controlled, peaceful nuclear fission. We have CANDO technology. We now have two players, including Brookfield's investment in Westinghouse. With Cameco, we're a world leader in nuclear, but we don't leverage that to the extent we should. So I'm here to make sure that we can help take the ambitions of the private sector in this energy transition, connect with the government, and have success at home and success around the world.
Great. We'll with that, we'll go into the first round of questions. So one of the key things in any industrial transition is you can have like big players doing like gigantic things, or you can have a collective of small players doing many little things. So I gave the example of Pakistan onboarding 22 gigawatts of solar very organically and very quickly. And I think the combination of these things, like Canada's been really good at big energy projects, nuclear projects, hydro projects, taking it with Brascan over Canadian technology over to Brazil. And there's an opportunity for us to participate in kind of the wind, solar, and battery and complement the big ticket items. So with that, if we want Canada to be an energy superpower, I'll start with Pierre, leveraging some of your operational experience at the Raglan mine that Glencore is operating up north. Start off, that place was running 100% diesel. And then, Pierre, being the innovator, puts up his hand, kind of, and says, hey, how about this? What if I can come in with wind and batteries and help you decarbonize millions of liters of diesel and keep your mine stable so that supply and demand match? So Pierre, can you share with the audience, like, what gave you the bright idea to go to the middle of nowhere to install a wind farm?
In fact, it's interesting. I was living in the Silicon Valley area at the time, and someone from NRCan gave me a call and he said, we've been trying to implement renewable energy at industrial scale in northern mining sites. And they asked me if I could kind of lead a proposal to do that with a team of other Canadians. And so we went ahead and did that. And we didn't know enough about it to accept the challenge at the time, but we could not find insurance for the project. Two previous wind projects in the Arctic failed before, so they said this will never work. It failed twice. And when we couldn't finance it nor insurance it, we had to sort of finance it ourselves with our own money. And we went out, and 14 years later, it's still working. So we had now two more industrial sites in the Arctic by virtue of being the first ones to prove that it could be made to work in the Arctic. And it's been a great journey. We talked about Canadian innovation transferring to other parts in the world. So we were approached by the government of the Bahamas after one of the major Caribbean storms, and they had heard that we had this installation with 800 people using wind energy and batteries in the Arctic. So they gave us a contract to revamp the grid on Ragged Island, which is one of the islands in the Caribbean. And this was all followed by CBS 60 Minutes and featured, in the 60 Minutes broadcast. And after that, we had another deployment in Africa for Canadian Mine with impact and benefit agreement. And we electrified 6 villages around the mine with water pumps and drinking water and solar panels. And electrified the streets, providing lighting at night for security and safety and all that. So this was all based on our experience and reputation for having it made to be working in the Arctic. So this is a grid of 27 megawatts of installed nameplate capacity diesel, about 16 to 17 megawatts regular load. We installed 8 megawatts of wind with a battery of 4 megawatts. We're displacing about 10% of the electricity on the grid, and essentially displaced 34 million liters of diesel in 12 years. So just multiply this by $1 a diesel, actually $2 when deployed to the Arctic, and that gives you an idea of the savings that renewable energy can do in diversifying diesel grids. But when you look around the world, a number of places that are facing similar situations or similar communities of 800 or even 80 people, the learnings there can give confidence to investors and confidence to other risk takers that it can be done, because we do have the numbers to show and display. So I think in terms of Tuglik, we haven't had as many uptaking of other mining sites with similar needs, but we signed a PPA 3 weeks ago with Agnico Eagle for a replication of the Raglan site at their Hope Bay project, which is 90 kilometers from Cambridge Bay, which is now named Iqaluit-Tutiak, as we're renaming all of these colonial names with indigenous names. So we'll be deploying a replica in the new gold district of Kitikmeot on the west side of Nunavut. And really glad to work with another champion, another key Canadian great company, Agnico Eagle, to again diversify their energy grid. So that's essentially the key metrics on this. Very proud of having accomplished this, and I really congratulate people at BluWave-ai as well for the innovation here, because it's Canadians have punched way above their weight since a long time, and I think we can do a lot globally with minimal resources, as we've proven many times over.
Erin would like to add to this.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in to say Pierre's point's a great one, because Canadian mining companies are some of the most progressive in terms of trying to get their carbon footprint down, partnering with Indigenous peoples. And at a time where we have a new Prime Minister who said, "Build Canada, build," you remember that from the campaign?
Yeah.
It's important to know that investments that Agnico will make with Pierre decarbonize that power. And the mines in Nunavut account for 1/3 of the GDP of Nunavut. One company's investment, Agnico Eagle. So the fact that they're then partnering with Canadian innovators to decarbonize their mine. And in our Arctic work, when I was a parliamentarian, we love projects like this because they're called dual use investments. It's helping the mine, but it's helping the communities with reliable emission-free power. So we need to see more of that type of innovation. So bravo Zulu, as we say.
Building off of that, some of the learnings from the likes of like the mining operations where Pierre's company is deployed. Jeff, how do you see us kind of taking that and transposing it to our larger grids with fluctuating renewables, balancing supply and demand? Okay, maybe it's not diesel, but we got natural gas filling the peaking of the electricity load, because you can't suddenly turn on nuclear. You can't suddenly turn on the hydro dam more than what it's flowing. So I think Brookfield is making some big steps there, and how do you see some of these learnings apply?
Yeah, I just take it from sort of the microgrid world where there's a problem and sort of ingenuity and collaboration solves a problem for a specific kind of remote location to kind of what we see on the macro level nationally. And so for Canada to be an energy superpower, which we have the potential to be, I think we need to take those lessons that are sort of learned on those remote sites where it is sort of a dual use kind of investment, right? And so, you know, what we've seen in Ontario is the Ford government sort of set the signal. It said, look, electricity demand is growing. They directed the IESO to run a number of procurements. They were looking at problems that they were trying to solve. They saw energy storage as a solution to that problem. And then they turned it over to the private sector and said, go and find us the projects that are going to satisfy that demand. And so I think sort of in the same way that Pierre and his team is kind of solving a problem up north, we just take that same principle and we can do it on a much larger scale. And I think the utility scale batteries, there's 26 of them going up across Ontario, is really a testament to that same sort of level of collaboration between, as Erin mentioned, sort of the public sector sort of setting the signal and the framework, and then the private sector sort of executing on that vision.
So if I can weave a bit of where our grids are going, and when I opened up, I alluded to, you know, electrification of the economy, EVs, heat pumps, data centers. Brookfield's deployments that you have won with the IESO. The IESO is the Independent Electricity System Operator here in Ontario. They keep the supply and demand balance in Ontario, just like Pierre has to work with the mine to keep that place balanced, right? So this is like a gigantic, Ontario's like a gigantic mine in this context. And you all have roughly 10% of the energy storage contracted by IESO that they're rolling out across Ontario. That energy storage, I kind of equated to, you know, using our aviation days. If you just put an airplane in the middle of the sky and it needs to figure out what it's doing, it just doesn't know anything, right? So you need a pilot, you need an autopilot, you need all this computing. So if you just put a battery in the grid, what the heck is the battery doing, right? So what are your thoughts, Jeff, on this ability of the batteries to pilot themselves in the grid, to react to the grid? And then I'll turn it over to Guillaume to talk about the data and the AI angle in not just in grids, but in multiple industries, how this plays out.
Well, maybe I'll start kind of right at the beginning. Electricity is an enabling technology. And so when you kind of go back in history and say, okay, when we discovered electricity, what did that do for humanity and sort of human society? And it really enabled industrialization. It enabled us to do things for kind of the population, to redefine the way that we manufactured things. And so at one level, electricity is kind of that enabling technology in the same way that AI is an enabling technology. And so if I sort of look at Guillaume and what he's doing, at some level, Guillaume, you're going to be a consumer of the electricity. You're going to use that electricity to solve big problems, you know, advancements in medicine and other really complex problems. But then, you know, Dev, you and the team, AI is also that decision maker. And so when I said what excited me about electricity is that every single instant of the day, electricity supply and demand has to be matched. Like, I don't have time to be doing that. So we can use AI to kind of help find that balance. And so I think what's really exciting about both electricity and the AI space is they're enabling technologies that are going to lead to, you know, greater productivity and greater production. And that's going to be beneficial for just human development.
Before we go over to Guillaume, from, you know, we need to do some of this for our own economy, but how do you see this rolling out around the world? I alluded to China having 2/3 of the energy storage globally, roughly 70 of the 100 and something gigawatt energy storage is in China. But I think there's an opportunity for Canadian players to export the combination of the, go and deploy the battery and operationalize and run it. So what are your thoughts on the export market? Like Erin, you alluded to Brookfield really starting off by exporting hydro. Capability, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think this is an exciting one. And I'm going to plug BluWave a little bit, Dev, in that as you meet the reliability needs of your grid, you have to have technology, and in addition to our great power workers and energy professionals. And batteries are key to meeting demand when fluctuation of renewables changes. Solar, the innovation you talked about is pretty incredible. Doesn't help you at night, right? So the same with wind. There's a lot of intermittency. Nuclear is the base load.
Yeah.
I really liked Stephen Leche's comments. He's been a friend for many years. He's a great minister. He's so keen on us selling this technology around the world. And the SMR in my old riding of Durham at Darlington will be the first commercial one in North America, and will just slightly beat one that's coming online in Europe as well. So you add all of these factors in, battery optimization through AI, so that you can fluctuate between sources and maintain that reliability, that stability, and that it can be affordable. Ontario is really balancing a modern grid, and it has to, because last year the Independent Electricity System Operator, in case you didn't know the IESO acronym, has said in the next 20 years we will need 75% more electricity in this province to meet the AI demands, to meet electrifying the GO train and the whole electrification agenda. We're not ready for that. So as Ontario makes the smart moves, makes the grid smarter, optimizes with renewables and other sources with batteries, why do we not take this expertise around the world? As I said, we're world leaders, but we haven't shown the bravado we need. We also have the financing and the sort of capital markets expertise as well. So I really think what I like about what you're bringing together today, Dev, is your goal is the Canadian energy sector and the world economy. Yep. We should get the balance right in Ontario and then compete aggressively for these same opportunities as other countries meet the same challenges of electrification, the growth of demand through AI, the need for a low carbon grid, and expanding need. And there's a lot of places in the world that have energy poverty right now. We have an abundance of electricity. We're quite frankly blessed. There are many parts of the Indo-Pacific and others where their grids are just getting up to where our was in the 1960s. So we have an opportunity to succeed at home and win globally.
Jeff, do you want to just add to that on, if you can comment on Brookfield's strategy to build up these things you're doing locally? And
Sure.
Maybe Guillaume on the AI export side of things.
Sure. I think Brookfield is sort of one of those companies that, again, it's sort of Canadian, started here, but it's really global. And we play on a global stage. And I see that within our business. I'll answer a phone call from China one minute and then Australia the next and Brazil the next, and think about that. And I think it's really exciting to be part of an organization that, I work out of the National Capital Region here, but you're really touching on things all over. And you're exporting your expertise, but you're also bringing back knowledge back to the Canadian market here as well. So it's sort of a circular kind of flow. And look, I think what Erin said is absolutely right. Like, we are doing a good job here. When we take that model and do it in other countries, we can help them as well. And so I think, I'm of the view that exporting that knowledge, exporting that expertise is something that, it's good for Canada and its economy, but we're also bringing something to other countries and other consumers that's going to benefit them as well.
So, Guillaume, perhaps you could also comment from the AI angle on exports, on data ownership, intellectual property, and those aspects of our AI companies participating in this type of ecosystem, being able to stand on our own feet in external markets.
Okay.
putting you on the spot.
A lot of stuff being discussed here. You know, one of the main takeaways, and I like the parallel to electricity. A lot of smart people have said that that AI is the new electricity. And if you start looking at AI as the power of what electricity brought decades ago, you start to understand how pervasive, as we were talking earlier today, it's going to be in every walk of life. Everything that you're all doing today, professionally or personally, will get replaced in a large part with an AI type of solution. And so that's the magnitude. I compare, and I'm gonna ruffle some feathers here with your questions because I'm
Go
gonna ad-lib
ahead.
a little bit.
I'm getting
You
a
know,
phone call anyway.
That's probably somebody watching me go, be careful what you're gonna say, Gil.
Tim Hodgson's calling me,
Right.
going, keep a clamp on that Hervé guy.
So, you know, sometimes in Canada, we take the leadership on specific things. For people that follow sports, you'll notice that over the years, we've become the first to, to bring and win gold medals in newly introduced sports in the Olympics. And we'll win. And we'll get the gold medal year 1, year 2, year 3. And all of a sudden we get the silver, year 2, year 3. And then we get the bronze. And then we're in the top 5. And then we're in top 10. What happens? We have great athletes who train around a new sport. They bring best practices and people observe. And then we don't have the national courage to then say, let's continue to invest in these athletes. If not, the athletes, the coaches, the researchers doing all of that sports research are going to be poached and brought into other parts of the world. And that's kind of what's happening in AI. AI, we had a world-leading position. And over the last 10 years or so, you're seeing it sort of top 3, number 4. New ranking comes out next year, will be number 7, number 8. Because we're having a hard time realizing the power of what AI is as a global tool to bring productivity at a scale you've never seen before. Think of the cell phone and how it changed countries that didn't have any comm infrastructures. And from one day to the next, they didn't have to put telephone poles and grids everywhere. They said cell phones. And they went from 0 to everybody carrying 2 cell phones. I remember the first time I went to China on business trips into South America. From one year to the next, nobody had cell phones. All of a sudden, everybody had 2. I still had 1, And so it's that kind of a technology. So how do you export AI? Well, you can export AI through solutions. So at Zetain, we've completed solutions for oil and gas to do real-time monitoring of well, inspection that is happening, north of Edmonton. But we've also done solutions that help people look at their massive Excel sheets or CSVs or whatever data they have and get trends and analysis that a human would take weeks and weeks to get just because you can't see it all. And so there's a wide spectrum of applications here. And I think the way to export it, if I take it to energy, which is kind of the back-end questions that you're asking me, I think that we can do a traditional Canadian, let's export energy approach. And that's okay. We'll make money. And it'll almost be like a raw resource. I know it's not because it comes from water, it comes from river. Let's look at energy as a raw resource. Or we can process that energy through data centers. And then what we're selling is a value-added result of what comes out of a data center worldwide, starting with the US. The US is projected to have 80% of the global consumption of AI compute power in the next 6 years. Today, data centers, roughly 40% of their energy goes to what I call traditional IT services. So you don't realize it, but today when you're doing a software as a service, when you're gaming, when you're chatting, and not AI chatting, just regular chat, texting, when you're doing IoT, when you're doing big data, you're doing traditional IT, you're not doing AI.
Yeah.
Today, about 40-50% goes to that, 50% goes to AI. In 5-6 years, 70% will go to AI, 30% will remain to the traditional IT type of consumption that you and I have been used to using for the last 10 to 15 years.
So Guillaume, are you suggesting that we should aggressively onshore computing workloads into Canadian data centers
Yeah.
and power them with Canadian electricity and then
All
export
Canadian-
the results
of that.
back.
And start
But-
with the US. They have a massive need. You don't have to go very far. One thing people have to remember, and I'll bring it back now to something you said, which is fascinating to me, the two of you, which is, now how do you bring that to a remote location? Don't forget that when it comes to AI, there's one term that we forget. It's called latency. What do I ask the AI to do? Where is it being computed? And how quickly is it coming back to me? Right? So when you're chatting, boom, you get it right back. That's because the data center is not that far. But if you're northern somewhere in Canada, and it has to come back to Toronto or Montreal or wherever, and then it has to go back, the latency may not work for you. So I think Canada, if they want to have a second, so leadership on exporting what I said, the second piece that you're making me think of is how about we right-size data centers so that they fit remote location requirements, where now you have local, smaller data centers that can meet latency requirements. So now you're equipping these remote locations with just-in-time information that they can use. Because if you're gonna, people think, oh yeah, I'll just bring it back to Montreal. Or it's not gonna work unless you're asking for stuff tomorrow. But for the most part, if you're in mining and those types of operation, there's a sense of I need the data back. Sorry, I need the recommendation back relatively
We
quickly.
need to talk after.
So I hope I answered the two sides of that.
Yes, and I'll build on that, but I think Erin wants to add a bit.
Yeah, one of the last things I worked on as a lawyer in Toronto before I was elected to Parliament, a by-election came up and suddenly I went from practicing law one day to knocking on doors. But one of the last files was citing of data centers in Canada for one of the large Silicon Valley players, and this is in 2012.
Yeah.
And they were already looking at this issue, and AI wasn't even part of the conversation.
Correct.
It was just handling growth of data. And the dream location in Canada at that time was actually Manitoba,
Yes.
because at the time it had the lowest power purchase agreement price and it was hydro-based power, so emission-free. And this was before ESG got all sexy and had its heyday. But there wasn't the infrastructure, nor was there a government that really even understood what a data center was at that point. So one of the interesting things as we're looking for, reshoring or bringing or growing this data market, Alberta's very aggressive, but a lot of the players don't want a natural gas fed large data center.
Yeah.
If I really want to mix it up and get controversial, I'm missing my political day a bit. Should we as Canadians allow 3 or 4 American companies almost in the same postal code to control global AI? Do they have an approach on use of personal data in their large language models where there's consent of the individual? Would they participate in the Patriot Act using of data, much like China requires its players to share whatever the communist state wants? So there is also an argument to be made, and this is being discussed in terms of data sovereignty, is should Canada have this sort of domestic capability that respects individual rights and freedoms and liberties, how you use your information, whether it's in an LLM or not, and leverage our global expertise. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of interest in Europe seeing Canada a bit as the bridge, really concerned with where the US is going on a number of fronts. Should we allow a few tech bros to control what will be the electricity of the future economy?
Now,
Think about that.
So if I can connect some dots here from what Guillaume's saying to what you're saying, Erin, and what we have on the ground in terms of electricity generation capacity. So in a future world where Europe relies more on Canada and computing workloads need to be distributed around the world, and when Europe is awake for the first 6 hours of their day while Canada's asleep, and we have generation capacity available, then what happens to your batteries and your assets in Canadian grids doing workloads that we're importing from Europe into Canadian data centers while their day is on and we're still asleep? Like, how do these things factor into battery deployments? Because in theory, right now, it's like just put the batteries on the ground. And then we'll just charge them starting at like 11 p.m. and get them ready for the next day of operations. Meanwhile, if the next 400,000 EVs do the same thing, and if all these data centers decide to import workloads from Europe and do the same thing, suddenly in the middle of the night, we have 8 gigawatts or 10 gigawatts of capacity that we have, but it's a new peak in a different part of the day. So what are your thoughts in terms of, like, you're putting these assets on the ground for like a couple of decades, and they got to be ready to deal with all these dynamics?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think the world is becoming very dynamic and very competitive and changing very quickly. And so, I think as Canadians, we've done sort of a lot of the same thing for many, many decades. That's been sort of the Canadian model. Hewers of wood, drawers of water, sell the commodities. To Guillaume's point, we need to upgrade our resources and sell that value-added product. And so that means for Canadians, we need to think differently. We don't just kind of plug that thing in and let it run for the next 20 years doing the same thing. We need to think about, how do we attract sort of that AI load? And how do we compete in a global marketplace where everybody that we're competing against is asking themselves that same question and pursuing it very aggressively?
Okay. Erin, did you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, just well said. I do think, I've said a few times, we don't just need elbows up, we need to smarten up too. We have been complacent on many of these things where we will generate some of the early success, and Guillaume talked about this. We've already kind of lost our first movers advantage in AI. We've got 3 of the most accomplished AI godfathers in Edmonton, Toronto, and Montreal. When there was the power struggle a year and a half ago at OpenAI, the person put in charge was trained at the U of T by Jeffrey Hinton.
Yeah.
So we were in the sort of the limelight, but already we've seen a lot of talent go. There wasn't enough capital in Canada to really fuel the growth. There's Cohere, and there's some really good success stories, and then adapting to use for business applications. But we've got to encourage risk-taking. The other thing I would add, and it's not quite the power demand of AI, but quantum. We're seeing the same early lead advantage Canada has potentially slipping away. 1/3 of the current quantum workforce has either been educated or has worked in Canada, globally. It's pretty incredible. It's just like AI. We were the highest per capita number of people with expertise in AI. We've got to really go hyper aggressive to not just start up, but to scale these players up here. And I'm optimistic about Mark Carney, because he did steal a policy of mine from 2021 on flow-through shares, which we've used in mining to really put private capital into play for that scale-up player. And then as they grow larger, we've got a very sophisticated capital markets in Canada, led by our pension funds and players like Brookfield. The pension funds have all copied the Brookfield investment model and are leaders, but we don't have that, third round level funding in Canada. We have startup, we have a good angel network, we get people started, but we've got to keep them here. And these conversations is part of that, Dev.
On angel funding, shout out to my colleague, Suzanne Grant, who's in the audience. She's the executive director of the Capital Angel Network, who helped BluWave in the early days. Thank you, Suzanne. And I just want to hand it to Pierre on this, on like closing out this part before we finish rapid fire. Pierre's got another role as a director on the National Research Council. With that lens, would you like to comment on this Team Canada, the export aspects? Erin talked about OpenAI. That guy, Ilya Sutskever, Israeli immigrant to Canada, studied at U of T under Jeffrey Hinton, goes to Google, co-founder at OpenAI, all from our Canadian research ecosystem, Pierre. So what are your What do you see from the NRC angle?
So at NRC, I've been on the council for 6 years. We get briefings from policy advisory and so on in the government about Canada's position on innovation, on R&D, on productivity per capita, compared to other nations. And essentially what our officials in Ottawa see is not reassuring. We've been on a steady decline in terms of productivity per capita, in terms of innovation and R&D investment. Of the 35 OECD countries, we're in the lower third, so to speak. So the thing is, for us to revert that, we need more BluWave-ai's, we need more partnerships between the Canadian state and the industry, and also the big players. We need to emulate what Brookfield has done in growing into a global player, and do some of the things that Guillaume is suggesting, some moonshots about maybe sovereign data edge cloud centers in the Arctic and other places. The Arctic, by the way, has the best wind resource on the planet. It's a surprise to us when we started operating 14 years there. The winds are better than Patagonia, better than North Dakota. You also have a 10% bonus of the higher density of the air being so cold. So it's a natural place to put good renewable resources. However, we found out that we can't go too high on penetration because of the base load, which is very difficult to achieve. And I think ultimately we can find solutions using AI to do that. For instance, the point that Jeff made early on, the balancing of supply and demand instantaneously is critical in the Arctic, because in a mining operation, if the grid collapses because you don't match the two together, miners will die, because essentially you need to evacuate the underground miners because there's no ventilation. And if they stay below ground, they would die from asphyxiation. If they move on the surface, they die from the cold at -50. So the grid has to be rock solid, and that's why we haven't been able to allow to operate above 10% penetration. However, as we gain experience in places like Summerside and other places, and AI enables these higher penetrations level, maybe we'll be able to do what Guillaume is saying about these sovereign.
So Pierre, we're about to lose the live stream imminently. So 15 to 20 seconds each, starting from the right to the left, rapid fire, closing comments, anything you want to share with the new government ministers who just got sworn in, and what's your takeaways for them from here?
Well, as a conservative, I wish a Liberal cabinet well, because this is an important time for our country. Tim Hodson, a military veteran, is our new natural resources leader. Worked for Goldman Sachs, knows the capital markets well. If we're ever going to build and get projects done quickly and show that you can earn a return in Canada, show the world that you can earn a return in Canada, now is the time. So not just talk about energy superpower, let's make it happen.
Jeff?
I'll be quick and I'll just pick up on that. I think it's Canada's time to show the world that we can get things done. And I think everybody's got to kind of get on board and just lean into this.
Pierre?
And we need more of the entrepreneurial state, as well as innovators like BluWave-ai, and many companies in Canada are born global just by virtue of the diaspora that we have in Canada, which spans the world, which gives us entries into markets and also innovations and ideas that other countries don't have access to.
Yeah.
I'm going to change gears. I would say compel government at all levels to buy directly from startups and scale-ups. You're constantly talking about it, but you're doing nothing to facilitate it. And we have to comply to contracts that are meant for the purchase of F-18s and nuclear plants. And you're losing that technology because you know what we're told, go sell to the US and then come back and sell to us next. And that's how companies disappear. So that's what I would say.
Okay, well, we will have the panelists here for live questions and answers. We're going to lose the live stream in a moment. So we'd like to thank everyone online who joined us today. On behalf of my team at BluWave-ai and the panelists, we really appreciate your time. We hope you found it pretty informative. You learned something new. And if we can operationalize many of the concepts that we're talking about today, I think Team Canada is in a good place. So thank you. Okay.